Imagine a casting call, right? But instead of Hollywood actors, the directors are out there recruiting freezing, hungry people directly from homeless shelters.
Oh, wow.
And the stunt that they are being hired to perform is deliberately shattering their own bones on concrete sidewalks. And this is all just to manufacture a $31 million insurance payout.
I mean, it sounds like the plot of a very dark thriller, but it is entirely real. And it was orchestrated not by, mobsters in a back alley, but by licensed officers of the court and a medical doctor.
Yeah, it's wild. And if you follow legal news lately, you know we are constantly wading through this incredibly confusing swamp of federal racketeering suits and complex court decisions.
Oh, yeah.
It's enough to leave anyone scratching their head. But there is a prevailing narrative out there right now, a narrative heavily pushed by certain trial lawyers and their supporters, that systemic legal fraud is basically a myth. They claim that the system is just too robust, too well-regulated, and that these racketeering cases are just giant insurance corporations whining to avoid paying out legitimate claims.
Well, it's a comforting thought, certainly. We all want to believe that the guardrails of the justice system are foolproof. People want to believe that when a lawsuit is filed, it is rooted in a factual event.
Right.
And when the legal industry loudly insists that, zero fraud exists at a systemic level, it can be very easy for the public to simply take their word for it.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because for today's deep dive, our mission is to look at the hard evidence and push back on that zero fraud narrative. We are looking at a very specific, heavily documented case from April 2023 to remind ourselves, and all of you listening, that massive systemic legal fraud absolutely exists.
It really does.
But, and this is the crucial part, we also want to reassure you that the justice system does eventually prevail. So what is the specific source material we're diving into today?
So we are looking at a detailed press release from the United States Department of Justice, specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York.
Okay.
And it outlines the mechanics of a massive $31 million trip-and-fall fraud scheme. This operation ran in the New York City area for 5 years, basically between 2013 and 2018.
Wow, 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years. And it was a highly coordinated effort designed specifically to defraud local businesses and their insurance companies. And it involved hundreds of people.
Which brings up an immediate mechanical question for me. I mean, $31 million is an astronomical amount of money. How do you manufacture that kind of cash out of thin air without being caught on day one?
You have to start small and then build a system. According to the DOJ, in the beginning, the participants in this scheme kept it relatively simple. They would instruct individuals to claim they had tripped and fallen at a specific location.
So like a completely phantom accident.
Exactly, a phantom accident. But phantom accidents are incredibly vulnerable to scrutiny.
Right, because an insurance adjuster is going to drive out to the site, look at the claim, ask for the ambulance report, and realize there's absolutely no physical footprint of this event ever happening.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If there's no 911 call, no time-stamped emergency room visit, and no witnesses, the insurance company will just deny the claim.
Makes sense.
So the scheme had to escalate to survive. It moved from mere fabrication to active staging. The lawyers running this operation realized they needed that verifiable paper trail.
Right.
So they started instructing their recruited individuals to actually go to carefully chosen locations, which they internally referred to as accident sites, and deliberately fall.
Wait, they were physically scouting locations in the city?
They absolutely were. The DOJ notes that the common accident sites used during this fraud scheme included cellar doors, cracks in concrete sidewalks, and purported potholes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were specifically looking for environments that inherently carried a premise liability risk.
Meaning places where a business owner or the city would automatically be legally on the hook if someone got hurt there. Like, I don't know, a restaurant with a poorly maintained metal grate out front.
Exactly. It's like a twisted Hollywood production company. You have these personal injury lawyers acting as the directors. They scout the perfect locations with just the right amount of cracked concrete.
Yeah.
They write the scripts for what is supposed to have happened. And then they bring in everyday people to act as the stunt doubles.
Yeah.
To take the actual physical fall on a hard sidewalk or a metal cellar door, call the ambulance, and create a legitimate time-stamped police and medical record.
But that brings up a really dark question. I mean, deliberately throwing yourself onto concrete or a metal grate is painful. It's incredibly dangerous.
Right.
Who is desperate enough to sign up to be a stunt double in a corrupt lawyer's insurance fraud movie?
And this is where we pivot to the human cost. Because the true horror of this scheme isn't just the $31 million stolen from businesses. The DOJ source reveals exactly who these lawyers were targeting for their stunts. And it is just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Over 400 patients were recruited into this scheme over 5 years, and the recruiters specifically sought out extremely poor individuals, drug addicts, and it was standard practice to recruit these patients directly from homeless shelters across New York City.
Yeah, reading the specific details from the DOJ release, it honestly turns your stomach. We aren't just talking about people who were a little down on their luck.
No, not at all.
The source highlights the reality of the intake meetings at the lawyers' offices. It says it was common for these recruited patients to literally ask for food when they showed up to meet with the lawyers.
Yes, they were hungry and they were freezing.
Yeah, the DOJ specifically notes that many of these people didn't even have sufficient clothing to keep themselves warm during the winter. They had poor quality shoes.
Right.
They are sitting in a presumably nice climate-controlled law office, shivering, begging for a meal, and the professionals across the desk are looking at them and seeing nothing but a tool to defraud an insurance company.
Well, what's fascinating here is the absolute weaponization of poverty. The architecture of this fraud required bodies. It required people who were so marginalized, so invisible to society that they wouldn't ask questions.
Right.
Because a person with a family doctor and a stable job is going to read the fine print on a settlement.
Yeah, they'd ask where the money's going.
Exactly. But a person living in a shelter, desperate for a tiny cash advance just to survive the week, is much easier to control. U.S. Attorney Damian Williams emphasized this perfectly. He stated that these professionals abused their licenses and their degrees to exploit the most vulnerable members of society, and it was driven entirely by pure greed.
They didn't stumble into a gray area of the law. They actively hunted for desperation.
Yes, they did.
But let me ask you about the math here. Even a staged fall on a cellar door, let's say a homeless individual deliberately trips, scrapes their knee, maybe sprains a wrist. A soft tissue injury like that might get you a few $1,000s from a liability policy to make the case go away. How did they inflate these minor injuries to steal $31 million?
Well, you've hit on the core mechanism of modern insurance fraud. Because to extract millions, you need medical charts that reflect life-altering catastrophic injuries.
Okay.
The payouts are calculated by algorithms that look at the severity of the medical intervention. So the patients were told that to boost the value of their settlements, and frankly to get paid at all, they were required to undergo surgery.
Wait, they made it a condition of the payout?
Yes, and not just one surgery. The DOJ notes that patients were generally told they had to undergo 2 surgeries.
Okay, wait, I have to push back here. Faking a slip and fall on a sidewalk is one thing. Coaching someone on what to say to an insurance adjuster is one thing. But how does a legal scheme orchestrate hundreds of actual surgeries? I mean, you need a surgeon, anesthesiologists, nurses. How does a medical doctor operate on healthy people in a modern healthcare facility without a hospital administrator or a medical board blowing the whistle? How does that happen in a vacuum?
That is the exact right question to ask, and it brings us to orthopedic surgeon Andrew Dowd. Because the fraudsters had a bottleneck. You cannot force a legitimate ethical surgeon to operate on a healthy person just because a lawyer asked them to.
Right, of course not.
So they needed to find a doctor who was willing to perform surgeries when others absolutely would not. They were likely utilizing private ambulatory surgery centers or manipulating subjective MRI results like minor joint tears to justify the procedures on paper.
Just giving them cover, basically.
Exactly. And Dowd was their guy. During the course of this scheme, he performed nearly 300 medically unnecessary surgeries on these vulnerable people.
300 unnecessary surgeries. And the financial incentive for him to do this.
Staggering. The DOJ states Dowd was paid approximately $10,000 per surgery. So he personally pocketed more than $3.2 million from this scheme.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are witnessing is the terrifying result of a systemic breakdown of our societal gatekeepers.
Yeah, absolutely.
We trust lawyers to filter out fraudulent claims before they hit the courts. We trust doctors to be the ultimate objective gatekeepers of our health, relying on their oath to first do no harm. But when those two specific pillars collude, when the lawyer and the doctor both decide to abandon their ethics for profit, the guardrails completely disappear. The hospital doesn't question the surgery because the licensed surgeon ordered it. The judge doesn't question the lawsuit because the licensed lawyer filed it with legitimate surgical records attached.
Precisely. The system didn't fail because the laws were poorly written.
Mm.
It failed because the human beings entrusted with enforcing those laws and medical standards chose to actively subvert them.
Mm.
And by requiring 2 surgeries, they leveraged the insurance multiplier effect. A second surgery proves to the insurance algorithm that conservative care failed.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, which drastically inflates the supposed pain and suffering and future disability of the patient. That is how you turn a scraped knee into a massive, multi-million-dollar settlement pool.
So a homeless person goes into a meeting asking for a winter coat and comes out with 2 unnecessary incisions, the risks of anesthesia and a permanent alteration to their body. So a doctor can make 10 grand and a lawyer can demand $1 million.
Exactly.
So who were the directors of this nightmare? Who built the system?
The architects of this scheme were 2 personal injury lawyers, George Constantine and Marc Elefant,
Eh,
and the volume of their fraud was just industrial.
really?
According to the DOJ, Constantine personally filed nearly 200 fraudulent lawsuits arising from these staged falls. From those cases alone, he earned more than $5 million in settlement fees.
That is an unbelievable scale.
And Marc Elefant was right there with him, filing nearly 200 of his own fraudulent lawsuits, also earning millions of dollars in fees.
Wow.
They built absolute fortunes on the backs of the destitute people they sent to Dr. Dowd's operating table. And for 5 years, because the paperwork looked perfect, they got away with it.
But this is the point in the deep dive where we fulfill our promise from the beginning. We promise to show that justice does prevail. Obviously, they didn't get away with it forever.
No, they didn't.
How did this entire $31 million house of cards finally collapse?
Well, it collapsed because eventually data catches up with you.
Mm.
The FBI and the National Insurance Crime Bureau dismantle the operation.
Ah, the data folks.
Yeah, because when you have the exact same lawyers sending hundreds of patients with the exact same types of falls to the exact same surgeon, the algorithms at the NICB flag the pattern.
They noticed the trend.
Exactly. The feds step in, the case went to court, and the sentences handed down by U.S. District Judge Sidney H. Stein prove that accountability is real.
Walk us through the fallout. What happened?
Well, George Constantine, the lawyer, and Andrew Dowd, the surgeon, arrogantly took their cases to trial.
Okay.
But in December 2022, a jury saw right through the paperwork and convicted them both of mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Both men were sentenced to 102 months in federal prison.
102 months. That is 8.5 years behind bars. That's nearly a decade of your life gone.
Plus 3 years of supervised release.
Right.
Now, Marc Elefant, the other lawyer, saw the writing on the wall and chose to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He received 24 months in prison and 3 years of supervised release.
But here's where it gets really interesting, the financial penalties. Because it's one thing to put a white-collar criminal in a cell, but the government also aggressively went after the wealth they accumulated.
They absolutely did. Judge Stein ordered massive forfeitures to strip them of their illicit profits.
Right.
George Constantine was ordered to pay back over $4.77 million. Dr. Dowd was ordered to forfeit $2.9 million. Marc Elefant had to forfeit over $955,000. And it is important to note that is just the forfeiture to the government. The DOJ stated that restitution to the actual victims of the fraud will be decided in addition to those amounts.
So to everyone listening, when people try to tell you that the legal system is completely immune to systemic fraud, when trial lawyers brush off racketeering concerns as just corporate whining from insurance companies, point them to this DOJ press release.
Exactly.
Point them to George Constantine, Marc Elefant, and Andrew Dowd. Massive, coordinated, multi-million-dollar legal fraud is very real, and it relies on the darkest exploitation of vulnerable people. But importantly, 102-month federal prison sentences are also real.
They are.
The justice system, the FBI, the federal prosecutors, they do work. They investigate the data, they prosecute the masterminds, and they strip them of their stolen funds.
It is a vital reminder. The legal system is made up of people, and people are fallible. Greed will always exist where there is a mechanism for profit. But the mechanisms for accountability, well, while they're sometimes slow to gather the necessary evidence, they are incredibly powerful when activated.
Yeah.
The U.S. Attorney made it crystal clear. No matter your professional title, your medical license, or your law degree, if you engage in this kind of egregious fraud, the federal government will hold you accountable.
It is quite a journey we've been on today. We started by questioning the myth of zero fraud and ended up uncovering a staggering $31 million machine.
Yeah, a massive machine.
We've gone from looking at cracked concrete sidewalks and metal cellar doors in New York City to the heartbreaking reality of exploited homeless populations who are just begging for winter coats and food. We examine the horrifying mechanics of a medical professional violating the Hippocratic Oath with 300 unnecessary surgeries just to trigger an insurance multiplier effect. And finally, we've seen the hammer of justice come down with multi-million-dollar forfeitures and nearly a decade of prison time for the architects.
It really is a profound case study. It shows us both the absolute depths of professional corruption, but also the ultimate resilience of the rule of law.
So what does this all mean? We know the perpetrators in this specific instance were caught. We know justice was served. But taking a step back and looking at the broader landscape of our legal system today.
Yeah, and I think this raises an important question, because we have just spent this entire deep dive examining a single scheme, just one operation in one city. But look at the sheer logistical scale of it.
Yeah.
It successfully operated for 5 years before the data anomalies caught up with them. It defrauded victims out of $31 million. It required the active, coordinated participation of over 400 patients, multiple law firms, and a surgeon willing to perform 300 actual physical operations in operating rooms.
It's unbelievable.
Right. And if a conspiracy of that magnitude, with that many moving parts and that much physical risk, could operate right under the noses of insurance companies and hospital boards for half a decade, how many smaller, more discreet fraud rings are operating entirely under the radar right now?
That is terrifying to think about.
I mean, think about the mechanics we just discussed. What if the patients in another scheme aren't being asked to undergo invasive surgery?
Right. What if it's simpler?
What if they are just being asked to visit a corrupt chiropractor a dozen times for soft tissue damage?
Oh, man.
The paperwork looks totally clean. There are no dramatic surgical scars. The insurance payouts are smaller, maybe $30,000 instead of hundreds of thousands. But because they fly under the algorithm's radar, they happen 10 times as often.
Right.
The scale of what we don't see, the quiet systemic fraud that doesn't make the DOJ press releases because it stays just below the threshold of federal attention, it could be absolutely staggering.
If they can get away with literally cutting healthy people open for 5 years, faking a few months of chiropractic visits must be absolute child's play. It really forces you to look at those confusing racketeering lawsuits in the news with a completely different perspective. You simply can't assume the system is inherently clean just because a lawyer says it is.
You must always follow the evidence. You have to understand the underlying mechanics of how these settlements are calculated and recognize that where there is a blind spot in the system, there will always be bad actors attempting to exploit it.
Well, to our listener out there, the learner, this is exactly why we do what we do. Keep questioning the world around you. When someone tells you a problem like systemic legal fraud doesn't exist, demand to see the data. Read past the headlines, look for the underlying mechanics of how these systems actually operate, and most importantly, stay curious. The world is complex, sometimes incredibly dark, but it is always fascinating if you are willing to look closely. And who knows, maybe the next time you walk past a perfectly cracked piece of concrete on the sidewalk, you'll wonder if it's just a tripping hazard or a potential movie set for a very corrupt production company.